We're joined by David Otto-Endeley, International Counter Terrorism and Organized Crime Specialist. He's also the director for Geneva Center, Africa Security and Strategic Studies. David is joining us from London. Hi there, David. Great to see you. David, African leaders are calling for a rethink on tackling violent extremism. What is the strategy at present, David? And what do you think governments can do to improve on what is already in existence?
Well, in terms of what the leaders suggested in Abuja, we haven't seen any strategy. But when you talk about combating terrorism, you're talking about both anti-terrorism, which is the prevention aspect, and also counter-terrorism, which most often is the engagement of law enforcement officials, the military, the police, etc. But I think the important aspect is to note that Africa, although it's one continent, it does have 54 countries, depending on where you're standing, but also it does have 5 regions. That means each region and each country has its own peculiarities in terms of how the groups raise money, how they operate, how they recruit. So the triangle, which I often describe as the motivational factors, what drives people into getting into terrorism, it's quite unique in the country, although there are similarities. The ways nations raise money, the way that they get their arms, supplies, and all that, it's also a different dynamics. But also the targets within each country is also similar, but also different in a way. So all these 3 levels, motivation, capabilities, and target, they are different in different regions. They are different in different countries. So I think the entire strategy should be based, of course, on a global or some kind of a holistic approach, but each region and each country must understand the DNA of the groups that operate within their countries, and then for them to be able to coordinate and collaborate with others. I mean, that's the approach that I see as one that could be effective.
So, David, when we look at what is happening on the continent, why has violent extremism increased on the continent? And why does it seem that the strategies of governments have so far failed to tackle the scourge?
I think one of the reasons why it has failed is because, there hasn't been any kind of a predictive analysis in terms of what happens next. I mean, we talk about the rise of the Islamic State, which then eventually collapsed a couple of years back. Of course, this was all the origins of 9/11 and all that. But a lot of the foreign fighters that left the then Raqqa and Mosul, which was, the so-called Islamic State stronghold, a lot of them did travel across the Sahara Desert, towards the countries like Libya and across to the sub-Saharan Africa. So that has spread across these nations. But Africa is quite vulnerable to these terrorist groups because, of course, we have a very weak socio-economic fabric. Most of the people who join terrorist organizations do so out of no other option but the fact that they do not have the economic ability. And we're not saying that all poor people join terrorist organizations, but we're saying that they pick most of their vulnerable, fighters or, those who join their ranks from the very poor side of the community. So that approach needs to be looked into very well. I think the other thing, which is quite important, is that African countries lack some kind of an actual coordination and collaboration. So even though we're talking about a regional bloc or say a regional counterterrorism center being established in places like Nigeria, the question is, what more can we learn from countries like Kenya that already has a center of excellence, in Nairobi that deals with counterterrorism? We've got similar centers across the 5 regions. So I think it's a matter of not trying to reinvent the wheel, but also learning from existing frameworks. And this is what I think, has been one of the Achilles heels of African countries coming together to coordinate and collaborate towards counter and anti-terrorism measures.